A good old-fashioned rocker.
Take two. We're calling this teaching tonight the dark roots and lies behind the theory of evolution. This theory was born in the fires of hell. This theory is the antithesis to everything God is and he teaches, his character. According to the theory of evolution, there was an explosion, the Big Bang, chaos. According to Scripture, God spoke over the peaceful waters of the earth. The theory of evolution says the earth was forged in fire. Fireballs. Right? God made Adam in his image. Well, God is perfect. Adam was perfect. Obviously, Adam made bad decisions, and he munched on the apple or whatever it was, and he fell. And he's been in, man's been in a fallen state since. But man was made perfect out of the mind of a perfect God and the image of a perfect God. Perfectly designed. The theory of evolution says that death and mutation built man, who is made in the image of a great ape, or whatever. The evolutionists want to say, not the great ape, but actually it was something before a great ape. But I think that the devil hates God. It's a big, bold claim. And I think that he intentionally wants us to believe that the universe came from nothing, because I think that he's calling God a nothing. And I think that we know that God made Adam in his image, and the devil wants to say that we're made in the image of a monkey, which I think the devil is also inferring that God is a monkey or a great ape, whatever. So according to the devil, God is a nothing monkey. This is what he teaches us. And through mutations, if you look up mutations, if I Google mutations are bad, okay? Extra fingers, disformed, mouse shape and whatever. Oh, they mutate and die, and the image of the monkey becomes man. You got to believe it. It's the opposite. This is the opposite of what God says. And so, no surprise, the devil is the father of lies. And his corrupt theory, I didn't use the S word there, is built on lies. It's not a surprise. I surmise. Okay. But we're going to cover a couple of the frauds tonight. We're going to show how the scientific complex still holds these absolute racist eugenic jerk bags. Can I say that? In high esteem. They're the priests, the grandfather priests of the religion of science. They can do no harm. Sure, we know how absolutely devastating discrimination and racism is, and we should decry it, and I decry it with every ounce of my being. We are all made in the image of God, cousins, literal cousins, under Adam. There's no such thing as race. This theory has promoted racism to such a level that I can't believe that in 2023 the world is still saying that God is a racist or whatever, and that the theory of evolution is great. It's good. It's good. It's great. Wait till you see what they teach. Wait till you see what Darwin taught. Wait till you see what Haeckel taught. Galton, Huxley, all of these guys. I don't think they believed the theory. They just used the science to justify their position, their politicking, their financial gain, their controlling of men. Like I said in the video I just released, it's perfect. They can get rid of the God of the Bible, throw him in the trash, and justify the white Eurocentric elites as the top of the pyramid. It was a great theory for them. And they didn't have any theory, or they didn't have any evidence for this theory. They had a theory. They had no evidence. They had drawings, forgeries. They just made things up and bullied and gaslighted people, the hardworking people of Europe, into believing this. This was during the Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment. Forged basically everything at the beginning of this was just ideas and forgeries. And what it did is it gave these guys a hall pass. People don't think this, but Washington, Madison, Monroe, Jefferson, Franklin, they all owned slaves. They were all eugenicists. They all literally believed that the white male was the height and the pinnacle of evolution. And wait till you see how implicit Ernst Haeckel was in this. There is the blood of a lot of men on his hand. His hands. It's crazy what I'm going to show you. Okay, so let's start with, how does a theory like evolution, because you got to think about this. No one had ever believed something, some kind of malarkey like this. No one ever believed this. I would argue nobody believes it still. Things getting better over time, things coming out of nothing, etc. How do you get a world who believes in the Bible, they're all deists, largely. Atheism at that point was like, whatever, nil, nothing. How do you convince the world that they came from great apes and through this process and the phylogenetic tree, etc.? How could you do such a thing? You think that the guy down the street with an idea would be able to get this out into the textbooks and into the people's brains and through whatever media was there at the time? No. Darwin's idea wasn't so brilliant and how would you say this? The truth of it so self-evident that it was just like, whoa, we hadn't thought of that. Thank you, Chuck. And now we all get it. No, you get something like this pushed through the same agenda filter that everything is pushed. Whatever. You can say whatever agenda you want to. It's going to go through the same channels. The elite intellectuals, elite politicians, elite businessmen. Boom, this is your new history. I did a series called The Science of Propaganda. It's here on my YouTube channel. Go down. It's about 5-6 months ago, where I cover Aldous Huxley speaking with Mike Wallace 70 years ago. And he nails everything. He's like, democracy? That's a joke. Madison Avenue controls everything. We get people to think what they think at the subconscious level. They don't know why they do what they do. They do what they do because we tell them what to do. This is not a new thing. And that was, Aldous Huxley was the grandson of Thomas Henry Huxley, the bulldog of Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was an eccentric, interesting, wealthy guy. He wasn't a great speaker. He wasn't getting anywhere with pushing his theory. It took Thomas Henry Huxley and the guy we're going to cover tonight, Ernst Haeckel, to push this information out. And they loved it. They both did. They actually didn't like natural selection. Ernst was a monist. It was his own religion he was bringing up. But Thomas Henry Huxley was a punctuated equilibriumist. He thought that there was jumps of evolutionary progress. He's like, nobody's going to believe this natural selection thing, Chuck. And they're like, wow, they're starting to believe this. Well, let's get behind Chuck. So they did, with all of their money and all of their power. Okay. You had to have wealth, is my point. You didn't just throw this idea out. So who is Charles Darwin? This is none of these sources will be any kind of creation, literature, or sourcing. This will all be secular sources. Except for Eugenie Scott, that I have to show later because the NCSEA totally got rid of her clip. So that will be on that. But anyways. Okay. A gentleman, and a scholar. Chuck, you're a gentleman and a scholar and a racist. But two of those three are good enough for us. Let history know that he was a gentleman. Side note, people, because he was an abolitionist, he was actually against slavery. People, they take that idea and they go, cool, he was actually not a racist, but he was. And I'll show you his quotes on it in a second. A gentleman naturalist. The wealth behind the theory. The wealth behind the theory. Because you need money to get such a thing into the minds of every person that ever lived after this. Wedgwood family, Josiah and Sarah Wedgwood, with their children posing at their estate, Etruria Hall. Charles Darwin's mother, Susanna, mounted, appears at center left. Emma Darwin's father, Josiah too, also mounted, is at center behind Susanna. I'm not sure if this picture is actually in there. It's just them on their horses being really, really rich. No, they don't have it on there. Whatever, doesn't matter. Charles Darwin was a wealthy gentleman naturalist, and his status as a gentleman did more to shape his theory than most people realize. Drink to that. We'll have a drinking game. Every time we come up with like a truth, something that Luke's like kicking around, and then he reads, it's like, oh, there it is. Gotta drink some coffee. We only drink coffee. Okay. Charles Darwin. Macroevolution.net. Charles Darwin was a wealthy gentleman naturalist, and his status as a gentleman did more to shape his theory than most people realize. No doy. I haven't said that in a long time. His social standing not only allowed him the time and leisure to create and promote his theory, but also fundamentally influenced how it developed. Darwin's father was a wealthy physician. His mother, a daughter of Josiah Wedgwood of the Wedgwood clan. I don't know what the Wedgwoods did. Imagine they wedged wood very well. Proficient wood wedgers. This is too serious of a show to be doing this. Stop it. We'll be the land's most proficient wood wedgers. We'll build a dynasty. Oh, okay. I'm gonna get the hook. Okay. One of the richest industrialists. Oh, they were industrialists. That's what it is. Okay. One of the richest industrialists in England. Moreover, by wedding his first cousin. Good move. It's like a chess move. Might not work well for the kids, but this is going to be good for the theory of evolution. Emma Wedgwood, Josiah's daughter, he secured a double-barreled inheritance of the Wedgwood fortune. They lived an aristocratic lifestyle with a full staff of servants. I wonder. Okay. It's a very proper house, with the properties observed to the last detail. Charles was even more of a stickler for etiquette than Emma. Permitting her maid to forego a bonnet led to a terrible tiff. He was horror-struck. She was a lady's maid, not a grocer's girl. It was in this non-egalitarian setting that Darwinian theory took shape. Darwin was so wealthy that he could spend his time just as he pleased. Since he had no need for a university or appointment or any other job, he never engaged in graduate studies, nor was he obliged, since he was not an academic, to consider the opinion of senior conservative faculty members. His plentiful capital kept him insulated from such constraints and left him entirely free to express his thoughts on evolutionary theory. As he himself says in his autobiography, I became convinced from very small circumstances that my father would leave me property enough to subsist on with some comfort. Though I never imagined that I should be so rich a man as I am, but my belief was sufficient to check any strenuous effort to learn medicine. 5 years on an unpaid voyage around the world, full-time servant, hire workers to carry out the grubby physical tasks that the investigation might require. When he wanted to examine the skeleton, blah, 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 employed a laborer. His wealth allowed him to assist younger naturalists who, in turn, helped them when the going got rough later on. In particular, he used his influence to assist both Thomas Henry Huxley and Joseph Hooker in obtaining positions. And they both reciprocated by lending him crucial support when he needed professionals to stand by his side. You're starting to see how this works? Anyone who thinks that this theory is just, it's just so true. It's just so true. You know what's fun? This theory is a bunch of rich, asshole white guys who just wanted to tell you what you believe, and you still do it 200 years later. I wonder what other loony things they believed back then that we were just like, whoa. I'll tell you this. My wife doesn't wear a bonnet, and I don't consider her a grocer gal or whatever. I bet you things have changed. Things change, right? It's called evolution, Darwin. This theory that they're holding on to. Like sand. Okay. You can go on, and whatever. This is just what it is. Now, let's actually talk about Darwin for a second. people that aren't so sure about his belief system. See if I can zoom this in a Wedgwood. This is from his second book. You know, the sequel's never as good as the original, right? It's just kind of how it works. Like, you have the original and it's great, gangbusters, and then you make Ghostbusters 2. Well, The Descent of Man was Ghostbusters 2, the racist version. For those of you keeping score at home, following at home, this is page 237 from Anthropological Review. I imagine that's the chapter. The Descent of Man, Part 1. The great break in the organic chain between man and his nearest allies, which cannot be bridged over by any extinct or living species, has often been advanced as a grave objection to the belief that man is descended from some lower form. But this objection will not appear of much weight to those who, from general reasons, believe in the general principle of evolution. Breaks often occur in all parts of the series, some being wide, sharp, and defined, others less so in various degrees, as between the orang and its nearest allies, between the tarsius and the other lemuride, between the elephant, and in more striking manner, between the whatever bird that is and the echinida, whatever. Let's say it. Ornithorhynchus, whatever, and other mammals. But these breaks depend merely on the number of related forms which have become extinct. So, I mean, you understand what he's saying here, right? It's real easy. I mean, you'd think that you'd have like an elephant and like an almost elephant, like an elephant and a rhinoceros and like an elanoceros. You would have them all. You wouldn't. It's weird that you just have very distinct creatures. Boom, boom, boom. You want like a tweener, right? You want a tweener, but we don't see them. And that's okay, because these are breaks. What does he call them? Breaks? He says breaks often occur in all parts of the series. Okay. But these breaks depend merely on the number of related forms which have become extinct and not yet found. At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. Okay. Now, I want to be clear before I read this paragraph. I believe we are all human beings made in the image of God, cousins under Adam and Eve. I believe that color is literally skin deep. I decry discrimination and bullying and any kind of racist ideology. I'm reading Charles Darwin. I do not agree. I need to have a whole banner here. I do not agree with what I'm about to read. I think it's absolute heresy, heresy to God, heresy to man, and the guy should be deleted from the history books. Just done. Remember, that was weird. We talked about that weird white racist guy that was totally wrong. It'd be great. Let's get rid of him. The words of Charles Darwin. At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man. Wow, I was about to read that, but I'm not going to. You want to know why? Last year I made a video. The full title of his book is The Origin of Species and the Struggle for Life for the Favored Races. Struggle for the Preservation of Life of the Favored Races, or something like that. And everybody came in and they were like, no, he meant species. Darwin he didn't mean races, he meant species. Darwin, the guy who came up with or popularized the whole idea of species. The book is called The Origin of Species. He could have said species. He just said it in the title of the book. The Origin of Species. The Struggle for Life and the Favored Species. He said races. Whatever. Take your bias. Defend the guy. 9 Ways to Sunday. Should we see what the actual name of the book is? Let's do it. All right, here we go. Origin of Species, full title. Let's actually look at the book. Here it is. on the origin of species by means of natural selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Chucky D. He knew what he was saying. He knew what a species was. He wasn't talking about species. Because you find out the root of this whole thing. At some period not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. We're going to cover Ota Benga here in a second. Ota Bang. At the same time, the anthropomorphous apes, as Professor Schaffenhauser has remarked, will no doubt be exterminated. The break between man and his nearest allies will then be wider, for it will intervene between man and a more civilized state, as we may hope, even than the Caucasian. It will intervene between man and a more civilized state, as we may hope, even than the Caucasian and some ape as low as a baboon, instead of as now between the Negro or Australian and the gorilla. Have you ever had the discussion with someone about whether or not Darwin was racist, and they say he was an abolitionist? I love Inspiring Philosophy. I love his ministry. We talk. He's great. He told me we can't do it. He was not an anti-racist. The funny thing about data is it's very interpretable, and largely you're going to interpret it through your worldview, depending on what you're defending. Well, I, for one, am against defending blatant, rampant, the genesis of modern-day racism, which the theory of evolution through these German, European elites were pushed. This is Darwin's cousin. His name is Galton. Some of you know Galton. He was an English polymath, explorer, anthropologist, and statistician. Galton's eugenics was a program to artificially produce a better human race through regulating marriage and thus procreation. He put a particular emphasis on positive eugenics, aimed at encouraging the physically and mentally superior members of population to choose partner with the same traits. The flip side of the coin was forced sterilization. Whoever they deemed the undesirables, the anthropomorphous apes or whatever. A lot of times it was the invalid, it was people that, had health issues, mental health issues, whatever. But this in the Jim Crow South, it was a thing. They were like taking women and sterilizing them. It's very bad. Eugenics is very bad. Galton, Francis Galton's cousin, he was also Charles Darwin's cousin. Okay? Keep it in the family. The Wedgwood family. The question is, how deep does this all go? We got Darwin. He's got this idea. Got to get rid of the uncivilized. We got Galton. He's like, well, you got to sterilize everybody who's not us. How deep does it go? In a minute, I'm going to show you Haeckel and what I found yesterday. And I can't believe that this man, they just finally took down the statue of Charles Pike. Pike, it was the big Freemasonic Civil War racist nightmare, KKK guy, terrible guy. And he had a statue up somewhere. And during the Black Lives Matters protests, they tore it down, which is awesome. Why that guy has a statue up is, other than he's just protected by their whole group of, their whole network. When I read you Haeckel, there needs to be a petition to just wipe him from the history books as well. You won't believe. You won't believe. Ernst Haeckel, his by embryo lie that I just made the video on is nothing. That's easy. That's small potato. Oh, I just draw what I want. I'm Harold in the purple crayon. I draw this thing. Nobody will question me. Whatever. Wait till you see where he's at and watch you. Okay. I need to tell you a story of a guy named Ota Benga. Ota Benga is important, and we spent a lot of time looking for him today. And I want to cover this before I get into who Haeckel is, because this shows a little bit of this group. This is a delightful young man, God rest his soul, named Ota Benga. Ota Benga. The African missing link is remembered on the 100-year anniversary of his death. Just recently, the 100-year anniversary of the death of a man known as the missing link from Africa was noted. On March 20th, 1916, Ota Benga had taken a gun and shot himself in the heart and ended his short life. Benga had been an attraction at the New York Bronx Zoo. In 1904, nearly 40 years after the end of legal slavery in America, a eugenics movement was highlighted at the World's Fair in St. Louis, Missouri. Many people still recognize Benga as a significant person in the history for this part of the story. In documentaries and social media, he was remembered for his sacrifice and having been one of the causes to end racism. 32-year-old embodied man along the river, his teeth filed to a point. Samuel Werner was an American businessman traveling in Africa. Basically, here's what happens with Ota Benga. This guy, Werner, whoever, gets him. Nobody knows how. Brings him to America along with a lot of his tribe mates, and they set up a exhibit at the World Science Fair or whatever in St. Louis, and all of the people would go and watch how the Neanderthals, the subhumans, lived, right? And it was like this big spectacle. That ended, and they took him to New York and put Ota Benga in the Bronx Zoo, in the cage with the orangutans. And since that wasn't enough, they put bones on the ground, and they told this story that he was a cannibal. And all of the people would come in, and they would watch. At lunch break, they would watch the subhuman. And he was trying to make a buck. He'd smile and take pictures, and eventually he killed himself because he was so destroyed. His Ota Benga he's just exactly as much human as we are, as the white elites that were watching this. He's a human, born in Africa. But it's even worse than just that. This is Madison Grant. You might ask yourself, how does Ota Benga end up in the Bronx Zoo? There's a guy named Madison Grant. He was an American lawyer and a zoologist and an anthropologist. He was a key. Madison Grant. Let's look at this guy for a minute. Let's look at how deep. There he is, Mr. Mustache. Mustache Grant. He was a key figure in the history of the National Park Service, who left behind a troubling legacy. He supported environmental conservation and worked to protect plant and animal species like redwood trees and the American bison. While Grant is known for his contributions to wildlife protection, he is best remembered for his support of eugenics. His 1916 book, The Passing of the Great Race, spread racist ideas that Grant claimed were scientific. Wonder where he got that idea. Policymakers used the ideas of Grant and those who agreed with him to restrict immigration and to control people's ability to have children. Any history of the National Park Service is incomplete without accounting of Madison Grant's influence. Yeah, these guys, I'm going to bring up a couple more. These aren't just your yahoo guys. These elites, they're all together. They're all believing the same thing, same network, it's the same group of people. So this is Grant. And Madison Grant is the guy responsible for locking Ota Benga up in the chimp cage. And he started the National Park Service, or was a major part of the National Park Service. And he pushed eugenics, whatever. Big surprise. Big surprise. Where were these guys getting... Look, one of these two things is true. Okay? I need you to think about this for a second. And I'm going to bring up another guy in a second before I even get to Haeckel. Either these guys were not racist. They were just like, everyone's the same and we're hanging out. And then Darwin and his crew comes through and goes, no, look, those are subhumans and we're the best. And they go, oh, I love this idea. Thank you for converting me. Or they already believed they were better than everyone else because they're psychopaths, narcissist psychopaths. Which do you think it is? Which do you think it is? Did they just like, hey, Darwin's got this great theory, man. He's really converting me over to this idea. Let's go get Ota Benga and throw him in the chimp cage. Darwin's right. Or did they know this before? Which comes first, the chicken or the egg, atheists? Which comes first in this scenario? This whole group of white elites who are just going to use this scientific narrative to just do whatever unspeakable things they want to do? Or were they all just good guys converted? You can't win either way. This theory. The Geological Society of America. My goodness, that sounds bona fide, doesn't it? Doesn't that sound bona fide? The Geological Society of America. I bet you these are the yahoos who push uniformitarianism. I bet Lyell and Hutton worked for these guys, or Lyell at least. Hey, what does geology have to do with biology? Nothing. Totally unrelated. They don't need each other. They're not two hands trying to fit into a pair of gloves. No way. That's not what they are. They're two totally separate entities. Just objectively looking at the truth. Just looking at this and going, hey, proof. No way one's feeding the other. No way one hand is feeding the other. Well, in this case, the Geological Society of America and its founders, William John McGee, was friends with all of these yahoos. Madison Grant and John McGee. William John McGee, let's just look this up here really fast. William John McGee, right? Let's see what it says about him. The bona fide. Known to his colleagues and signed in notebooks as W.J. McGee. He was a geologist. Preferred to be known as he was like a big deal guy, right? Everybody loves him. Ota Benga. Oops. Ota Benga. The man who was caged in a zoo. Benga was kidnapped from the Congo, taken to the U.S., where he was exhibited with monkeys. His appalling story reveals the roots of a racial prejudice that still haunts us. Black clergymen who had been summoned to the Harlem's Mount Baptist arrived in a state of outrage. A day earlier, the New York Times reported that African man, the pygmy, had been put on display in a monkey house. Crowds of about 500 people, with Ota Benga just under 5 feet tall, in anticipation of larger crowds after the publicity in the New York Times. Oh yeah, the New York Times was big behind this too. Can you imagine that? The New York Times was really promoting this idea. Big surprise. There was actually the editors at the Times saying this isn't a big deal. They're subhumans. Like they said that. They were like, I don't know, I can find the article. Like they're subhumans. It doesn't matter. In anticipation of larger crowds after the publicity in the New York Times, Benga was moved from a smaller chimpanzee cage to a far larger one to make him more visible to spectators. He was also joined by an orangutan called Dohong. Crowds masked to leer at him. The boyish Benga, who was said to be 23 but appeared younger, sat silently on a stool, staring, sometimes glaring through the bars. The exhibition of a visibly shaken African with apes in the New York Zoological Gardens 4 decades after the end of slavery in America would highlight the precarious status of black people in the nation's empirical city. Pitted the colored ministers a few elite allies against the wall of white indifference as New York newspapers, scientists, public officials, and ordinary citizens reveled in the spectacle. Let's see who was all involved again. Newspapers, scientists, public officials, and ordinary citizens reveled in the spectacle. You think that the humans that were just there, the public that were there, would have reveled in this if the narrative wasn't being pushed? Come check out this thing. We proved Darwin's theory, and they've got the subhumans here. This is great. White people are great. You know they're like, oh, we are great. Let's go look. Ooh. That's what they end up doing. They're sheep led to the slaughter. By the end of September, more than 220,000 people had visited the zoo, twice as many as the same month 1 year earlier. Nearly all of them headed directly to the primate house to see Ota Benga. His captivity garnered national and global headlines. Most of them inured to his plight, for the clergymen inside of one of their own house with the monkeys was startling evidence that in the eyes of their fellow Americans, their lives didn't matter. Why? Why does anybody support this theory? Let's see here. Attempt to communicate with Ota Benga failed, but his palpable sadness and the sign stoked their indignation. We are frank enough to say that we do not like this exhibition of one of our own race with the monkeys. Gordon fumed. Better not say monkeys. Did you mean grade 8, minister? You better mean grade 8, minister. That's a straw man. Gordon fumed. Our race, we think, is depressed enough without exhibiting one of us with the apes. This is what needs to be elucidated. This is what needs to be seen. This theory needs to be done away with. This theory has so much negative, destructive, lying, racist, no good fruits. You will know a tree by its fruit. What positive fruit has this ever bore? What scientific advancement? How has this enriched anyone's life other than the guy who wants to get away from the God of the Bible? What positive life benefit has this theory brought anyone other than people who want to escape the judgment of God and this idea that I'm on the earth and God is watching me? He cares who I lay down with and in what position. It's the only person to benefit. This is the only benefit anyone's going to get, to do whatever in the hell you want to because you're just an animal. This is the fact that this is not, that I'm telling you this and it wasn't taught in school, is all you need to know about what I'm telling you. That's it. You learn about this in your biology class? Wait till you hear about Haeckel. These guys look like the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny. And Haeckel's the angel of death. We think our race is depressed enough without being exhibited with one of the apes. We think we are worthy of being considered human beings with souls. You know what, minister? I share that sentiment. Man, I hope that in Ota Benga in heaven, these guys are in hell and they're in the cage with the monkeys. I don't hope that. I don't know what I hope. Sucks. The display, he insisted, was in keeping with the practice of human exhibitions of Africans in Europe, breezily evoking the continent's indisputable status as the world's paragon of culture and civilization. Unrepentant, Hornaday declared that the show would go on, just as the sign said, each afternoon during September. Hornaday was not some rogue operator, as the nation's foremost zoologist and a close acquaintance of President Theodore Roosevelt. Cheers. Drink. Old Teddy. Electric love. That was Edison, but it's a good song anyways. Theodore Roosevelt. A close acquaintance. How close? Think they met in public? Maybe they met at a club, just hung out and shared their philosophies, maybe? Without all of the working class and non-whites? Maybe? Hornaday had the full backing of two of the most influential members of the Zoological Society, both prominent figures in the city's establishment. The first, Henry Fairfield Osborn, had played a lead role in the founding of the zoo and was one of the era's most notable paleontologists. Oh, no shit. Oh. I didn't read this article. So we got the geologists, the zoologists, and the paleontologists in on this so far. How could you possibly conspire to pull off some kind of theory like this? I don't know. How about you have the leaders of each one of the fields in your group that hates not white people? How about that? That's a good start. You want to justify your thing? Like, maybe they didn't even believe in God. Maybe they just wanted to justify their thing. Or maybe both. Likely both. Played a lead role in the founding of the zoo and is one of the era's most noted paleontologists. I'm sure he was an upright guy. You know what? He was probably a great guy. Right? Am I right? Like a really good scientist? Never lied about anything? Just always on the level? Him and his leader of geology and the other leader of the national parks, they're all just, I'm sure they're just gentlemen and scholars. I'm sure all of them are gentlemen. He would later archive fame for naming Tyrannosaurus. Oh, look at that. He named T-Rex. The second, Madison Grant, was the secretary of the Zoological Society and a high society lawyer from a prominent New York family. Grant had personally helped negotiate the arrangement to take Ota Benga, one a valuable asset to the city of New York. The clergyman had no success at the zoo, left the park, vowing to take up the matter the next day with the city's mayor, but the complaint did catch the attention of the New York Times, which editors were dismayed that anyone might protest against the display. Whose editors were dismayed that anyone might protest against the display. The New York effing Times. The standard in intellect. You can get a subscription today to the New York Times if you're smart enough. They'll get you one today. Hey, get the New York Times. Stay in. Wait till you see the CNN article or CNN interview that we're going to play. Whose editors were dismayed that anyone might protest against the display. We do not quite understand all the emotion which others are expressing in this matter. We don't get it. They're just animals. What is the big deal? Did you see his teeth? He's not human. Have you read Chuck's book? Did you read Chuck's book? He's put it all in there. He laid it all out. We're the civilized races and they're the not. This is the struggle for life and the preservation of favored races. What is everybody so freaked out about? Pretty soon they'll be gone. We might as well make a buck on them now. We do not quite understand all the emotion which others are expressing in the matter. The paper said in an unsigned editorial, Ota Benga, according to our information, is a normal specimen of his race or tribe, with a brain as much developed as those of its other members. Whether they are held to be illustrations of arrested development and really closer to the anthropoid apes, where did he get that? The other African savages. Or whether they are viewed as the degenerate descendants of ordinary Negroes. They are of equal interest to the student of ethnology and can be studied with profit. I want to make this quick stop to say that one of my lead protagonists accuses me of being racist because I don't believe their story that the pyramids were built by some sort of caveman, early human, nomadic human. I don't think they had the technology back then. I believe in the biblical account, which means that they were highly advanced. Highly advanced. After the flood, Tower of Babel, pyramids, all easy to do. We're getting worse. We're devolving. This is anti-truth. And this guy is the biggest supporter of this theory. I just hope he comes across this or whatever. Because what could your possible defense for this be? It doesn't matter that they were these people. The science is that good. No, it's not. You have the same people in charge today, believing the same things, just doing the same things. It's the same. There's nothing new under the sun, as the Bible says. We do not quite understand all the emotion. I'm not going to read that again. I can't. And teaching Christianity. Christianity is dangerous, right? Right? These are the colonizers, okay? If they used Jesus to colonize, great. This is what they did. This is what these people always did. Jesus said to love everyone, to forgive everyone. There was not a single ounce of any kind of racist anything you can get from any of the words of Jesus. And if you followed Jesus, you would have died trying to stop this. Or you would have definitely been involved. Hey, whoa, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? This is not right. Anyways. Jesus is the problem. Yeah. Well, Jesus isn't involved in this little thing. Okay? Okay. The editorial said it was absurd to imagine Benga's suffering or humiliation. Pygmies, it continued. The editorial from the New York Times. The editorial from the New York Times said, Pygmies are very low in the human scale. The idea that men are all much alike. I read this quote earlier. The editorial said it was absurd to imagine Benga's suffering or humiliation. Pygmies, it continued, are very low in the human scale, and the suggestion that Benga should be in a school instead of cage ignores the high probability that school would be a place of torture to him. the idea that men are all much alike, except as they have had or lacked opportunities for getting an education of books, is now far out of date. Which means that before Darwin, people used to say that if they have access to education, they could be just as smart as you. It's just a matter if they have access to education. But, hey, we have to trust the science. The idea that men are all much alike except as they have or lacked opportunities for getting education of books is now far out of date, says the New York Times. Why am I telling you about this? In the sober opinion of progressive men of science, Benga's exhibition on the hallowed grounds of the New York Zoological Gardens was not mere entertainment, it was educational. They believed Benga belonged to an inferior species. Where did they get this idea? I read you where they got the idea from. People, I'm going to tell you, Christians, whatever, agnostics, whoever, you're going to say that Darwin was a racist, and they're going to say no, he wasn't. And they're going to say that the theory wasn't racist. Absolutely say that Darwin was a racist, and they're going to say no, he wasn't. And they're going to say that the theory wasn't racist. Absolute anti-truth on top of anti-truth. Just do this, okay? If we're going to stick with this theory, here's my challenge. Stop gaslighting. Stop bullying. Stop fraudulating. Stop lying. Be transparent. Let's see all of the data, just like the CIA with whatever, the JFK files or whatever. Let's see them all. See them all. Let's just see everything you've got. Let's see all the history. Let's see the actual science you have now. And then let us make a decision. That's all I ask. Hey, this is our history. This is where it came from. This is who funded it. This is why they funded it. This is what we have now scientifically, starting to get better, whatever. We have genetics or whatever your thing is. Now, go ahead and make the decision based on what's good for you. What's good for you? That would be fine, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be great? Instead of bringing the children in and forcing them to believe this is fact and not telling them any of the actual truth of the story and where it comes from. They believed Benga belonged to an inferior species. That's not in the Bible. That is not a single. The further we get away from the Bible, the bigger trouble we get in, period, every time. Putting him on display in the zoo promoted the highest ideals of the modern civilization. This view had, after all, been espoused by generations of leading intellectuals. Louis Agassiz, the Harvard professor of geology and zoology, who at the time of his death in 1873 was arguably America's most venerated scientist, had insisted for more than 2 decades that blacks were a separate species, a degraded and degenerate race. Oh, Louis Agassiz, whatever. I wonder if he's still related to Agassiz and they took the Z off because of the relation. Harvard professor. You think I give a shit if you're from Harvard and you're a geologist or a biologist and you think that you're just like, I'm the guy from Harvard? Look at the history of Harvard. Look at the history of Cambridge. Look at the history of Yale. Look into the Skull and Bones. Look into Prescott Bush. Look into these people. Who cares? You went to a place that a bunch of rich, white, elites hung their hat, lobbied for, you gave money to it, they wore the colors, your football game won, you think you're something. This is all smoke and mirrors. It's all money and politics and status. A school. Yeah, well, look at this guy. He's the Harvard professor of geology and zoology, who at his time in 1873 was arguably America's most venerated scientist. America's most venerated scientist was saying, he insisted, for more than 2 decades that blacks were a separate species, a degraded and degenerate race. So compelled by the forgeries of Haeckel and the imagination of Darwin that he's running around as the professor of Harvard, pushing this absolute poison. 2 years before Ota Benga arrived in New York, Daniel Brinton, a professor of linguistics and archaeology at the University of Pennsylvania, had used his, wasn't Penn? Isn't that where Joe Paterno was from? Oh, it's Penn State. had used his farewell address as president of the American Association of the Advancement of Science to attack claims that education and opportunity counted for varying levels of achievement among the races. The black, the brown, the red races differ on... This is like a live reaction show. I didn't find this earlier. Oh, my heart breaks for Ota Benga. Can you imagine what they put him through? He shot himself in his chest. Yeah, that's the official story. Who knows anymore? If he did, though, that's... Here we go. Here's another top-class guy. If I look up Daniel Brinton or Louis Agassiz, let's do this. This will be fun. Let's look up this guy. One of the great scientists of his day, the founding fathers of the modern American scientific tradition. I have devoted my whole life to the study of nature, and yet a single sentence may express all that I have done. I have shown that there is a correspondence between the succession of fishes in geological times and the different stages of their growth in the egg, and that is all. It chanced to be a result that was found to apply to other groups and has led to other conclusions of a like nature. I have dedicated my whole life to the natural sciences, and I have discovered nothing about a fish that I made up. I've proved evolution. I've done my part. One of the great scientists of his day and one of the founding fathers. Are you starting to get a feel for why I feel the way I do about science? Aaron, whoever? Do you see the bedrock? The bedrock, the foundation of your religion. And you think that you're better off than Christians and the Bible. Founding fathers of the American scientific tradition remain something of a historical enigma. A great systematist and paleontologist. Oh, another paleontologist. Shocker. A renowned teacher and tireless promoter of science in America. He was also a lifelong opponent of Darwin's theory of evolution. Interesting. Yet even his most critical attacks on evolution have provided evolutionary biologists with insights. Oh, the son of a minister. Anyways, so this guy, we've got paleontologists, geologists, zoologists. We got them all. They got all the information. An interesting study is the Bone Wars and the guy who found the horse foot evolution, which he found and then destroyed, like going to the moon or whatever. He found and destroyed it, but he drew the pictures. He's like, yeah, I found these things and they're great. O.C. Marsh is his name. O.C. Marsh. He is the nephew of Peabody, George Peabody. Look this up, and was financed by Peabody, who also financed, I believe, his cousin, J.P. Morgan Chase. J.P. Morgan. It's one club, baby, and you ain't in it. Well, whatever. That's enough of that article. I was going to go back and show that one dude from the Park Service was implicit, but who cares? They all are. Doesn't matter. We're going to cover Ernst Haeckel. This is going to take me a minute. Let's go. Ernst Haeckel. In the history of biology. Again, I said earlier that Darwin had an idea and had some money, but how do you get this out? He used Thomas Henry Huxley and this Yahoo, Ernst Haeckel. The German zoologist Ernst Haeckel was arguably the most influential champion of Darwin's theory of evolution on the European continent, and one of the most significant worldwide. As his biographer Richard Whoever emphasized, more people at the turn of the century learned of evolution theory from his pen, Haeckel's pen, than from any other source, including Darwin's own writing. This is how big of a deal he was. He was a bigger deal than Darwin, basically, at the time. His drawings, his fake drawings, whatever. Furthermore, Darwin himself considered Haeckel a crucial proponent of his theory. How can we explain the mismatch between Haeckel's extraordinary influence among his contemporaries and his relatively modest place in the current historiography of biology? Why are Haeckel's studies nothing like Darwin industry? To answer these questions, we outline Haeckel's contribution to evolutionary biology and anthropology, and to a lesser extent, the general history of his ideas. Okay, so if you don't know this, I covered it in my piece. This is Haeckel's Ontogeny Recapitulates Phylogeny, and it's in all the textbooks. I actually showed quite a bit of this in textbooks currently with colors and everything, like, in the last 15 years for sure. So basically what he did here is he said, this is the theory of evolution represented in the gestation and development of embryos. So humankind is the top of the evolutionary tree that he drew, and Tadpole Fish Jones is the start of it, right? F1. So ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny means that as it goes through the process of developing from embryo to human, it remembers its evolutionary journey. What a load of nonsense. He believes this. Talk about being blinded by bias. He's like, yeah, we were a little fishy dude, then we were more of a fishy dude, then we were like a fish eel, and then we were this thing, and then eventually we were the tiktaalik, and then a bird thing, and then a pig, and then humans. So the idea was that this process, as the embryo gestates and develops, is representative of the evolutionary process. So they would show this and they would say, you don't believe our theory? Look, the embryos tell us the story. The embryos are reliving evolution. It's right there. Total fraud. Totally lied. Totally nonsense. Not based in science. Fudged. Whatever. Made up the whole thing. I want you to hear this defender of Haeckel, a brilliant but highly controversial man. If you ever know what VOR is doing, he's listening to these kind of lectures, usually bothering Chloe, the sweet housewife, every 5 minutes. Look at what they said. Look at the thing that they said. I can't believe the thing that they said. So he's just gone on a glaring 35 minutes of how brilliant Haeckel is. This visionary, and you look at all the pictures, this is his biography. He was a dude. He was awesome. He was in this building. He drew these guys. How could he have known those things? He did this thing. He believed in dualism and yada, yada, yada. He had migration of man. He, told us we came from Africa or whatever other things. Oh, stem cell. They credit Haeckel with stem cell research. He didn't. He made it up, but he was right somehow. Two prevailing theories of embryo development. So we're going to watch him. I'm just going to let him talk for a minute, and then we're going to get the VOR take on how this guy responds to this.
Yeah, this organism had that amount to develop in the embryo. This one had that amount of development. This one had that amount. It's a nice theory. And it was called Ontogeny Recapitulates Phylogeny.
It's a nice theory.
Eventually, it was found to be not entirely correct. It was an oversimplification. Oh, right, we have to go back and deal with this. I'll come to what went wrong with it in a minute. In doing this, he had to redraw a number of original drawings of embryos, and he had to rescale them and alter them. And he overdid the arrangement of the diagrams to fit the theory, just to put it crudely. And his worst instance of this.
And then about a minute later, as he fumbles through this, he's been a very articulate man this whole interview, or this whole lecture. And he gets into this, and he's just, dude, full spin doctor, full, whitewashing it, damage control. And he lets a couple things slip. He goes, well, we have to deal with this. He says we have to deal with this. Listen to him say it under his breath.
We have to go back and deal with this.
I have to go back and deal with this.
It's a nice theory. And it was called Ontogeny Recapitulates Phylogeny. Eventually, it was found to be not entirely correct. It was an oversimplification.
Not entirely correct. That's one way to say totally wrong. It was not entirely correct. It's not at all correct. Eugenie Scott says the same thing. It's not at all correct. You don't go through the same processes at all. It's just not a thing that happens. It's not at all correct. The only thing that you could consider correct is this is about vertebrates. We start with like a vertebrate and like develop out as like the brain neurologic system goes, and then it branches out as the DNA tells you what to build. What they start with a vertebrate. It's the only thing that's similar. Not entirely correct. Not at all correct at all. Listen.
Oh, right. Yeah, we have to go back and deal with this.
Oh, right. We have to go back and he like doesn't want. We got to go back and deal with this
in a minute. In doing this, he had to redraw a number of original drawings of embryos, and he had to rescale them and alter them. And he
had to redraw a number of his original drawing. He made them up, and then he had to resize them, and then he had to alter them, and then he had to just totally come on.
He overdid the arrangement of the diagrams to fit the
I'll
theory.
fast forward just like a
No,
minute.
there was no mea culpa. But he wasn't forgiven for this. And this was Haeckel's problem. I think he was very stubborn and very determined.
He wasn't forgiven for this. What? It was a lot worse than that. It was a lot worse than this that he wasn't forgiven for. But it's a nice fall thing. Yeah, he's bad. He lied about this, whatever. 100 years later, but they actually found out, his peers were like, dude, you're totally lying. The other embryologists, you're totally lying. And he's like, yeah, I totally lied. They're like, you can't do that. And he's like, I can do whatever I want to. And then they just kept the information in the textbooks. They're still there today in some textbooks. They just kept it in the textbooks. They figured this out by 1900 that it was a lie. And they're like, yeah, leave it in there. It's good. It's good material. Totally convincing. He's not forgiven.
And so the organisms had slightly different tracks. 40 minutes. Okay, so I think I'll actually, I'll skip the rest of the embryology and go on to the oceanography because it's no way interested.
It's not, just gonna skip that. Do you hear the dude off stage? What's that? 40 minutes? I think I'm gonna stop covering this. I think I'm just gonna not cover this, so don't be suspicious, right? He's just out. Okay. Eugenie Scott. I kind of want to tell you about Eugenie Scott, but it's not really worth my time. She's the modern day version of these people. She's like, just super Karen, just like, she hates creationism. She just attacks it all the time. Everybody's like, ew, creationists fear Eugenie Scott. She's the head of the National Center for Science Education in America, and you've seen some of the stuff I've covered with her before. This is her talking about Haeckel's mistake, his lie, his bold-faced lie.
Of development and our understanding
ideal, then they may have to look
in general.
It's clear that Haeckel may have fudged his drawings somewhat to look more like his ideal than they actually are.
This girl's, she's the devil.
Fudged his drawings somewhat to look.
Listen to her defense of this. When an atheist is attacking you because you believe in Jesus and you believe in the Bible and they have the science, I want you to think of Eugenie Scott. I want you to think of the lack of intellectual honesty that she's going to have. If we had a guy who just totally made something up, I'd be like, yeah, he's a bad creationist. Like, he made that up and that's not good. And that doesn't look good for us. Whatever. He's bad at his thing. You don't have to lie about the Bible, so I don't know why he did that. Listen to what she says.
That Haeckel may have,
Ideology in general.
it's clear that Haeckel may have fudged his drawings somewhat to look more like his ideal than they actually are. Now, does that actually take away from what we know about the relationship of embryology to evolution? Not a bit.
If anything, it proves it. Double.
The whole Haeckel's embryo story has been greatly blown out of significance. It is a minor footnote in the history of science. And actually, it's been known for 10 or 15 years that Haeckel's embryos are not to be relied upon.
Eugenie, let me just go ahead and fact check you here with the ultimate of ironies, me fact checking Eugenie Scott. It's been known for over 115 years. It's not been known for 15 years. 15 years prior to this aired, intelligent design advocates proved that this shouldn't be in the textbook and that it was a lie, and there was hearings, and they got the books to stop publishing it. That's what happened. It hasn't been known for 15 or 20 years. 15 or 20 years ago, we caught you red-handed pushing a known lie, a century-old known lie, to push your theory because of the lack of evidence you actually have. And finally, they said, shit, gotta take it out. I guess that's it. We're done. To take it out of some of the textbooks, or redraw them, because that's fine too, because that's what they actually do. Just whatever. 15 to 20 years ago, Eugenie Scott, it's this whole thing again with her hands.
It's clear that Haeckel may have fudged his drawings somewhat to look more like his ideal than they actually are. Now, does that actually take away from what we know about the relationship of embryology to evolution? Not a bit. The whole Haeckel's embryo story has been greatly blown out of significance. It is a minor footnote in the history of science. And actually, it's been known for...
We got some intelligent design advocates here in the chat. Did you guys know about this? Like, it's been blown out of proportion. You mean every person knows about it and learns about this in school and people are talking about it? Or the intelligent design advocates actually got this information released and are just showing you guys what lie faces you are? Is that what it really is? Had anybody heard about this before? That the guy, the number 3 guy, you're my number 3 guy, Ernst. That's my Joker talking to his guy. You're my number 3 guy, Ernst. You're more popular than me. You made this theory happen. You're the guy. And you totally lied. The thing he's most known for is ontology recapitulates phylogeny. And he totally lied. You were lied to. The guy straight up, just like in my video, Harold the Purple Crayon kid draws the mermaid. He's like, yeah, I want you to believe in this. And you believe in it. And it's in the textbooks. Who cares? It backs the theory of evolution, and we need it so we can put Ota in a cage, and we want to be up at the top, so someday we'll actually have evidence, maybe. But for now, for the next 200 years, we got to make shit up. We have to. It's the only way people are going to believe this is they can see something, and there's nothing. So here, drawing, minor footnote in the history of science, 15, 20 years ago. Well, Eugenie, and I would love to get her on my show. And I would love to talk to her. When you hear what I'm about to show you about who Ernst Haeckel really was, I would love to talk to Eugenie Scott and say, do you understand that you are abetting this guy? That you are an accomplice? That you are defending him? A known liar, racist, nightmare human. And you're defending him for your precious theory. You're defending his lie for your theory. Yeah, I know it looks bad for you, Eugenie. I know you guys think you have it all. You don't. And your guys are all racist liars. And their theory sucks. It looks like a big deal for the theory of evolution.
For 10 or 15 years that Haeckel's embryos are not to be relied upon. The reason why the diagrams are reproduced is because they're easily available. There's no copyright on them. It's an easy way to illustrate a point. And I would argue that the basic point that's being illustrated by those drawings is still accurate.
If there's any creation scientists that are involved in any such shenanigans, they need to repent. We represent God. We don't have to lie. We don't have to build up our own thing and sell it as true. None of these things. That is a bad look. And Eugenie Scott is like, yeah, basically the thing is true. It's not true, except for the vertebrates and their vertebrates. There's no part of it's true. It's an absolute bold-faced lie. It's not a minor footnote. It's a big deal, and everybody should know about it. And if everybody will help get all this, like get that video out, maybe it'll get 1 million views, and maybe 1 million people will know about it, because 1 million people need to know what they're defending. Now, what are they actually defending with Ernst Haeckel? I would argue the same thing. Sure. Before I read this, I want to make another disclaimer. YouTube, TikTok, AI, atheists, whatever. I not only do not condone what I'm about to read, I decry it with every bit of my being. I've been, from my understanding, my mother's bloodline is Jewish, which would mean that we're matriarchally Jewish by blood. I'm not practicing. I love the Jewish people. As a conspiracy theorist, I constantly try to talk sense and or rebuke anybody who buys into a Jewish conspiracy. It's a whole deep thing that gets into that, but that is very dangerous and misinformation, and the Jewish people are God's chosen people. They have a very turbulent relationship. It's between them and God. I wouldn't suggest anybody try to meddle. You don't know the history, you don't know the background. All you need to do if you're a Christian is thank God that Jesus came to the secular world. That's it. Don't worry about it. I decry what I'm about to read. I'm shining light into a very dark place, and I stand against the thing I'm about to say. I can't rebuke a dead man, but I absolutely want to shine light on the monster that was Ernst Haeckel and what he did. Ernst Haeckel's alleged anti-Semitism and contributions to biology. Ernst Haeckel's popular book, Nature, Natural History of Creation. Oh, the Natural History of Creation. He was a monoist, by the way. They believed in Mother Nature, of course, the opposite of Father, of course. Represents human species in a hierarchy, from lowest, Papuan and Hottentot, to highest, Caucasian, including the Indo-German Semitic races. His stem tree, see figure 1 of the human descent. Oh, maybe we should actually look at this. I don't know if I can see it. I don't know how to zoom. I thought I did. I was going to be awesome, but I should look into this. Can I zoom? Oh, here it is. I guess I can't zoom very far. That's all in German, anyways. His stem tree of human descent and the racial theories that accompany it have been the focus of several recent books. Histories arguing that Haeckel had a unique position in the rise of the biology, N-A-Z-I, for those who don't know what the N is, I got to be careful, biology during the first part of the 20th century. In 1971, Daniel Gaussman brought the initial Bill of Particulars. He portrayed Haeckel as having specific responsibility for the N racial programs, for the German racial programs. He argued that Darwin's champion had a distinctive authority at the end of the 19th century, throwing into the shadows the myriads of others with similar racial attitudes. But it was not simply a general racism that Haeckel expressed. He was, according to Gaussman, a virulent anti-Semite. Since its original publication, Gaussman's thesis has caught on with a large number of historians, so that in the present period it is usually taken as a truism. An obvious fact of the sordid history of biological thought in the first half of the 20th century. Perhaps the most prominent scholar, at least among historians of biology, to adopt and advance Gaussman's contention was Stephen Jay Gould in his first book, Ontology and Phylogeny. Gould took as his subject Haeckel's principle of recapitulation, the proposal that during ontogeny the development of embryo went through the same morphology states as the phylum based through its evolutionary descent, what we talked about. So according to his conception, the human embryo begins as a one-celled creature, then takes the form of an ancient invertebrate, then of a primitive vertebrate, then of an early mammal, then of a primate, then finally of a distinct human being. Gould wished to assess both the principle's historical fortunes and its then contemporary status. He admitted that Haeckel's concept of heterochrony, differential temporal regulation of the several phases of development remained an important feature of our understanding of embryogenesis. But he expended considerable energy to show that his predecessors never coherently analyzed or pursued the concept. Moreover, Haeckel's principle of recapitulation and Gould's estimate ran counter to Darwin's own theories of embryonic development. The hardened wedge that Gould used to pry Darwin away from Haeckel came from Gaussman, to whose thesis the young scientists unhesitatingly subscribed. But as Gaussman argues, Haeckel's greatest influence was ultimately in another tragic direction: National Socialism. His evolutionary racism, his call to the German people for racial purity, and unflinching devotion to a just state, his belief that harsh, inexorable laws of evolution ruled human civilization and nature alike, conferring upon favored races the right to dominate others. The irrational mysticism that had always stood in strange communion with his grave words about objective science, all contributed to the rise of Nazism. How's his purple crayon drawings looking so far? Haeckel's monism and the birth of a fascist ideology. Gaussman has pumped new life into his earlier charge and expanded its scope. He continues to maintain that Haeckel, dead a decade and a half before Hitler came to power, had virtually begun the work of the Nazis. For Haeckel, the Jews were the original source of the decadence and morbidity of the modern world, and he sought their immediate exclusion from contemporary life and society. He further argues that Haeckel's malign influence did not stop with the Nazis. This German's ideas became, in Gaussman's estimation, the primary source of fascism through Europe in the first part of the 20th century. When you when you understand reality and you understand the nature of the thing that we are in, it's hard. It's like part of you wants to just go back into the Matrix and eat steak. But when you understand who God is and who the devil is and how this all fits together and who's been in charge, you see the pattern. And when the Bible said that there's nothing new under the sun, it meant it. The Bible means what it says. And these people, so Jesus was taken to a high place and tempted by Satan. If you work for me, I'll make you the ruler of the whole land. And he said, no, get thee behind me, Satan. These people that take the bait, that get in bed, maybe literally with Satan, they follow there's the same pedigree as the same psychopathic, money-hungry, power-hungry people. And they will use whatever. They'll use religion, they'll use scientific religion, they'll use politics, they'll do whatever. They're going to die with $20 million or more, and they're going to be the influencers, and their actual life is never going to be reported. If it weren't for the internet today, we wouldn't be having this discussion. This information has been happening for all of humanity. These people in the past, you think they're good, you think they're prominent. Whoever is the victor writes the history books. And our history is this, and it's been this for a long time. I've said on this show that the theory of evolution is from hell, and that it has led to unspeakable destruction, and the people in charge are just going to keep oscillating between controlling through a religious way and then through a scientific way. And then the scientific thing is going to become so decadent and terrible, they're going to flip that we need God. And they're going to say that God, runs the show for them. And they're just going to keep going, and they're going to win all the way. I had an intuition about this. I knew about Darwin and his writing in The Descent of Man. I didn't know how deep it went until I did my research today, which is why I did an unprepared show. These people at the top of the geologist, zoologist, paleontologist, anthropologist, these people, they're all networked. They all know each other. They all meet in secret and push these agendas. And it's just what's always happened. This is why we have to be smart with conspiracy, because it's easy to go, ooh, the Illuminati and blah, 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 whatever. This is what's actually going on. And Haeckel was influenced by Darwin, but already believed what he believed. Haeckel is an anti-Christian. He's an anti-cleric. I plan to do this on my video. There's too much to cover for a 3-minute video. Trying to make it a 1-minute video is impossible. He was a monist. He worshipped nature. He was an absolute racist, an absolute maniac. And he worked with Darwin to get this theory out. And Huxley is the same thing. Thomas Henry Huxley, I'll cover him next, is the same idea. I don't think he had quite as bad a fruit. And even Huxley and him got into it a little bit, and Haeckel. But these things, these marginalizing life, and let me be very clear. Sure, they're putting it about race in this instance, but they feel that way about you also, human, whatever your race is. It doesn't matter. They believe they're above you. They're at the top of the pyramid, and you're all the workers. And they don't, like, people are surprised about what's going on in the world. They don't care about you. You're a subhuman to them. They're demigods in their eyes. Now that I've sufficiently cleansed your palate, your intellectual palate, with what we're dealing with, we're going to do a nice little hit piece from CNN.
I think I'm becoming a hoodie guy. Like, I like hoodies. I'm like Zuckerberg, without all the billions. Herschel Walker apparently isn't too much of an evolution buff. Quote, at one time science said man came from apes, did it not? Walker, the frontrunner for the Georgia Republican Senate nomination in 2022, said in an appearance in March at a church in Sugar Hill, Georgia, adding, if that is true, why are there still apes? Think about it. Okay, I will. So, here's the deal. Humans and apes evolved from the same genetic ape ancestors, a species that is now long extinct. It's known in the scientific world as common descent. Humans did not, however, evolve directly from the current occupants of your local zoo. They are one branch of descent from their ape ancestors. Humans are another branch of descent. According to a Discover magazine article published last month, quote, while we share our ancestry with these animals, along the way, over millions of years, we all changed. It's believed that this human divergence from the chimpanzee lineage of apes happened between 9.3 and 6.5 million years ago. We each adapted to our own environments or specific circumstances or niches. That's Zachary Coffin, a biological anthropologist at Vassar College, telling Discover. Or as Fabio Mendes, an evolutionary biologist, wrote, because two or more new species always originate from an ancestor species, and this process has been occurring since the origin of life, any two species we observe in the present are related. The truth might hurt, but yes, humans and chimpanzees are distant relatives. And so are blue whales, white sharks, sequoia trees, mushrooms, flies, earthworms, bacteria, etc. They're all relatives of yours, end quote. What a Thanksgiving dinner. Pass the potatoes, bacteria. In short, evolution doesn't work in a linear fashion. It just doesn't. Now, Walker is far from the first person or first famous person to ask questions along these lines. Back in 2017, comedian and outspoken conservative Tim Allen tweeted this, quote, if we evolved from apes, why are there still apes? The post terrifyingly got more than 48,000 likes. The broader question of evolution remains a point of considerable disagreement among Republicans. In a 2013 Pew Research Center poll, just 4 in 10, 43%, of self-identified Republicans agreed with the statement, humans have evolved over time, while a plurality, 48%, said that humans have always existed in their current form. 2/3 of Democrats and independents said they believed humans had evolved over time, for what it's worth. Now, more recent data speaks to that split. Gallup survey polling shows that in 2019, 40% of respondents said that God created humans in their present form, while 33% said humans evolved with God guiding the process, and 22% said humans evolved without any influence from a divine being. Sidebar. The number of people saying humans have always been in our current form has been on the decline over the past decade, while the number of people who say evolution happened without any influence from God has been on the rise. The political reality then is that Walker's questioning of evolution fits more broadly into not only how he's positioning himself as a candidate, but also where the Republican Party finds itself at this moment. Remember that Donald Trump famously or infamously said this in 2018.
Just stick with us. Don't believe the crap you see from these people, the fake news. What you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening.
Trump hung his entire presidency on the notion that elites and the establishment are not only wrong about things, but are willfully misleading you, and that the only way to take power back was, and is, to reject all forms of conventional wisdom and pass down knowledge. In its place, your own feelings and your own thoughts about the world. The more outside the mainstream, the better. It's proof of your status as a true outsider. Now, Herschel Walker, in a video announcing his Senate campaign earlier this year, very much leaned into that idea of outsider status. Watch.
The politicians pick American against American, rich versus poor, black versus white, urban versus rural. I don't believe in that garbage. it's a lie.
Now, seen through that lens, it's hard to imagine that Walker's positioning on evolution will cost him votes. Heck, it might even gain him some votes among those people who see his views as proof of what an outside-the-box thinker that he, in fact, is. But political positioning aside, let's not get it twisted here. What Walker is doing isn't debating whether evolution exists and if a divine hand plays a role in it. Instead, he's fundamentally misunderstanding what scientists say and what evolution does. And that is the point.
How'd you guys feel about that little piece? I saw a couple comments. Wow. 40% of Republicans don't know what the thing is, and 48% duplicitously answer the same thing, but they don't know. For what it's worth, Democrats had that right 2/3 of the time. They're smarter. Ooh, Tim Allen did the thing. Ugh, gaslight, gaslight, blast, blast. And CNN goes, if you can't trust us, you're left to your own thoughts. You can't be trusted with your own thoughts. You have to let us think for you. And by the way, evolution is a fact, and if you don't believe it, you're not smart. If you don't believe it, you're not... Look, here's from Discover magazine. Here's what evolution is. Oh, blah, 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 blah. We all come from the same bacteria. They're all related. Pass the bacteria. Pass the potatoes bacteria. We get it. You don't. And that's okay. Because you don't think for yourself. We think for you. And we figured it out. And you're smart. So you believe what we say. CNN. Funny thing. 40% of the people in the world as of 2019 still believe that God made man, and only 20% believe that it was this nonsensical atheist agenda. Did you hear that? Double. Praise God that some people still can hold on to any intellectual capital of their own. 40% of the people interviewed or polled said, yeah, God made us in our current form. And only 20% said no. You ever feel like that? Christians, do you realize that we outnumber the atheists 2-1? We believe that God made us in our current state 2-1. And then the other 30% believe that God did evolution. So there's 70% of us that believe that God did it, and 20% of this yahoo who are sure that it's not there. They know God, and if you are smart, oh, by the way, for what it's worth, people believing in evolution is going up fast, and people believing in God is going down. So you want to be on the right side of that one, right? Because you're a well-informed thinker. So you're on the way up because you don't believe in God, right? And the people that believe in God are on the way down. It's just whatever. No evidence. It's just what it is. Hey, we come from this. We come from this. Sorry, you can't say apes. You're stupid. We're smart. You got to believe us. You believe in God, you're stupid. And end.